Hello, hello. It's Sunday again. Hope I stopped that echo in time. Always forget to shut off the main YouTube page before I start that. But anyway, thanks for coming. Yes, it's Mother's Day in the US at least. I'm not sure where else. Of course, I almost changed the topic at the last minute because we heard yet another Mother's Day sermon that was about everything but mothers. It's about submissive wives. So, you know what next week's topic might be. I just didn't want to take the time to do a sloppy job and change it at the last minute. So, we'll deal with that next week. But today, last week there was a request for the two witnesses, and I decided to do that along with the four horsemen because they both have connections between Revelation and Zechariah. So we're going to take a look at that. That's what we got up on the screen. We're going to start with Revelation 6. And I'll just read through this part about the seals, because the first four seals are the four horses. So Revelation 6, let me give you the link for this first. Let me post that there. And I watched as the Lamb opened the first of the seven seals, and I heard one of the four animals, or beasts, the word in Greek means wild animals, and so that's how I translated it. Anyway, four wild animals say in a voice like thunder, "Come." Suddenly there was a white horse. Its rider held a bow and wore a victor's crown and went out conquering with the intent to keep on conquering. Everybody in chat? When the Lamb opened the second seal, I heard the second animal say, "Come," and out came another horse, a fiery one. Its rider was given a large sword and granted the power to take peace from the earth so that people would slaughter each other. When the Lamb opened the third seal, I heard the third animal say, "Come." Suddenly there was a black horse whose rider held a pair of scales, and I heard a voice from the center of the four animals saying, "A day's ration of wheat for a day's wages, and 3 days' ration of barley for a day's wages, and don't damage the olive oil and the wine." When the Lamb opened the fourth seal, I heard the fourth animal say, "Come." Suddenly there was a green horse, that's what it means in Greek, not pale but green, whose rider was labeled Death, accompanied by Hades. They were given jurisdiction over a fourth of the earth to kill the sword, with famine, other causes, and with wild animals of the earth. So, there's the four horses. Now we're going to go to Zechariah 1. And it says in verse 8, "During the night I had a vision, and there before me was a man mounted on a red horse. He was standing among the myrtle trees in the ravine. Behind him were red, brown, and white horses." So we got two reds, a brown, and a white. And Zechariah says, "What are these, my Lord?" The angel was talking to me answered, "I will show you what they are." Then the man standing among the myrtle trees explained, "They are the ones the Lord has sent to go throughout the earth." And they reported to the angel of the Lord who is standing among the myrtle trees, "We have gone throughout the earth and found the whole world at rest and in peace." Then the angel of the Lord said, "Lord Almighty, how long will you withhold mercy from Jerusalem and from the towns of Judah, which you have been angry with these 70 years? So right now we know something about the context that we didn't know before if we didn't look, which is that Jerusalem and Israel have been punished for 70 years. And the prophet is asking, or the angel is asking, how long are we going to put up with this while the rest of the world is at peace? So it says, "The Lord spoke comforting words to the angel who talked with me, and the angels that was speaking to me said, 'Proclaim this word. This is what the Lord Almighty says. I'm jealous for Jerusalem and Zion, and I'm very angry with the nations that feel secure.'" I was only a little angry, but they went too far with the punishment. So we know something about these horses, but they're not quite the same as the horses in Revelation, but there are four of them, and there's a connection. These horses have been set out on some kind of mission. Okay, and now I want to read back in the translation, mine on Revelation 11, about the two witnesses. "Then I was given," this is Apostle John, of course, "given a stick like a measuring rod, and it was told, 'Arise and measure the temple of God and the altar and those worshiping at it. But leave out the outer court and don't measure it, because it was given to the non-Judeans who will trample the holy city for 42 months. That happens to be 3.5 years. And I will give my 2 witnesses the charge of prophesying for 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. 1,260 days happens to also be 3.5 years, using 360-day prophetic calendar day years. In prophecy, it's 360 days. So 3.5 years either as 42 months or 1,260 days. And in the Old Testament, it uses the term time, times, and half a time. Verse 4, these witnesses are the 2 olive trees and the 2 lampstands set before the master of the earth. And if anyone decides to harm them, fire goes out of their mouths and consumes their enemies. This is how whoever decides to harm them must die. These 2 have permission to lock up the sky so it doesn't rain for as long as they prophesy, to turn the waters into blood, and to strike the earth with all kinds of disasters as often as they choose. And when they complete their testimony, the wild animal or beast descending out of the abyss will fight and conquer them and kill them. Their corpses will lie in the main street of that main square of that city, which is figuratively called Sodom and Egypt. That is where their master was crucified, which is to say Jerusalem. People from every group and tribe and language among the nations gawk at the corpses for 3.5 days, refusing them burial. The earth dwellers gloat over them and even send gifts to each other because these 2 prophets had tormented them. But after 3.5 days, the spirit of life from God entered into them, and they stood on their feet, and great fear fell upon those who watched. Then they heard a loud voice from the sky, or heaven, same word in Greek, say to the 2, come up here. And they ascended into the sky in a cloud while their enemies watched. In that very hour there was a great earthquake, and 1/10 of the city collapsed. 7,000 individuals were killed, and the survivors were gripped with fear and gave honor to the God of heaven. Okay, so that was also after or part of the 6th trumpet. So just make a note of those things. We'll come back to them. But that's, we read about the 4 horses, and then we read about the 2 witnesses. Now we're going to go back to this time to chapter 4 in Zechariah, where it says, the angel who talked with me returned and woke me up like someone awakened from sleep. He asked me, what do you see? I answered, I see a gold lampstand with a bowl at the top and 7 lamps on it, with 7 channels to the lamps, that is to say, tubes. Also there were 2 olive trees by it, one on the right of the bowl and the other on its left. I asked the angel who talked with me, what are these, my lord? He answered, do you not know what these are? No, my lord, I replied. So he said to me, this is the word of the Lord to Zerubbabel, that was the king, not by might nor by power, but by my spirit, says the Lord Almighty. What are you, mighty mountain? Before Zerubbabel you will become level ground. Then he will bring out the capstone to shouts of God bless it, God bless it. Then the word of the Lord came to me, the hands of Zerubbabel have laid the foundation of his temple, etc., etc. So then it goes down, verse 11. Then I asked the angel, what are these 2 olive trees on the right and left of the lampstand? Again, I asked him the same question, and he replied, don't you know? I said, no. So he said, these are the 2 who are anointed to serve the Lord of all the earth. Okay, so we know something about 2 olive trees and 2 lampstands for the Lord of all the earth. Okay? Now, let's see, I already read that. I wanted to go back and forth twice, and I forgot to do it. I did it in the wrong order. But anyway, these 2, let's see, where does it say? These are the 2 olive trees and the 2 lampstands set before the Lord of all the earth, Lord, Master. Okay? So there's a definite connection between Revelation and Zechariah on these issues, these 2 issues of the 2 witnesses and the 4 horses. So the 4 horses are some kind of angelic messengers. Well, angel means messenger, but they have a task of roaming the earth and reporting back to God. And in other chapters in Zechariah, they also bring judgment. So there's a definite connection with the 4 horses of the first 4 seals in Revelation. And then the 2 witnesses are the 2 olive trees and lampstands. So they're both of them. And one thing you'll notice about the description in Zechariah is that the tubes going to the lamps mean that they're perpetually filled by the oil from the trees that are alive and growing next to them. So the oil, anointing, or spirit, however you want to interpret that, is continual. So these two witnesses are very much tied to that prophecy in Zechariah, okay, or that vision in Zechariah. So we can't just take Revelation isolated like that, and we have to understand that there are many hundreds of references to the Old Testament, and the fact that it references Zechariah and Joel and Daniel for three big ones are really important and help us understand the context. So now I'm going to go into my commentary on, and I haven't given you the reference for this, I don't think, so let me post that. There's nobody in Discord, so I'm not going to have to post it there. Anyway, yeah, the prophet Joel. Yes, your name's in the Bible. So how about that? Anyway, so sorry about that if I didn't mean to out anybody, but anyway, Revelation 11, 1 to 14 is about the two witnesses, okay, also. So we read about them, but this is my commentary on the thing. All right, another task given to John at this point is measure the temple of God, which had been destroyed on earth, and thus must be one that would be rebuilt sometime early in the 70th week. We can, people will try to interpret that as something else, but we can speculate that the building of this temple is part of the treaty with Israel that starts off the week per Daniel 9:27. I think it's just verse 27. And we can rule out the temple in heaven because this one will be in the holy city of Jerusalem. So again, this is also not us as the temple of the Holy Spirit. We're the temple of the Holy Spirit, not the temple of Jerusalem. Okay? Which was to be trampled by non-Judeans for 42 months, 3.5 years, since Daniel had been told that the violation of the temple and worship of the beast marked the midpoint of the 70th week, and since this trampling was to last 3.5 years, we have further support for presuming it was built at the beginning of the 7 years. So this is how I'm, by process of deduction, that I'm saying that since the temple will be violated after 3.5 years, then it had to have been built 3.5 years earlier at the beginning of the tribulation. So if we just came in, I just read passages from Zechariah chapter 1 and 4 about the four horses and about the two witnesses. Let me just go back there real quick. So these are the two who are anointed to serve the Lord of all the earth. They are portrayed in Zechariah 4 as two olive branches besides two gold pipes that pour out golden oil. Why it's golden oil there, I don't know, but it's olive trees beside the thing. So they are olive trees and lampstands that stand before the Lord of all the earth. And the four horses are some kind of supernatural beings that God sends out to bring reports and also to bring judgment on the basis of those reports. So that's who all those, the four horses and the two witnesses are. But as for, well, let me just read my commentary here and I'll go on. Worship of Israel would never be permitted after the beast declares himself God in that temple, so he has to desecrate it at the midpoint, which means there have to be normal temple things going on in a regular physical temple for 3.5 years before the two witnesses are killed. Okay, so then we're introduced to the famous and controversial two witnesses, chapter 11 that I read earlier. Most of the current focus is on their identity, but the text does not bother to identify them, probably because these might be, they're human beings because they can be killed, so they're mortals, but at the same time, they're being tied to two entities that have been serving God for many thousands of years as represented by two oil lamps or two olive trees. So the text here does not identify them beyond that. Which two people are these? It doesn't say. The important fact is the duration of their prophetic activities, that being the very familiar 3.5 years. And since this is mentioned in the same place as the measurement of the temple, which was just earlier when I read Revelation 11, we can connect this period of time to that temple, meaning both the temple and the activity of the two witnesses coincide during the first half of the 70th week. So, you get why we're, looking at all these clues. What it's telling us is that there's a 7-year period of judgment remaining for Israel and for the world, and that this judgment is divided into two halves of 3.5 years each. This 3.5 years is designated in Scripture as time times in half a time, 42 months, or 1,260 days, with each year of the 3.5 years being 360, not 365 days. So we know that the two witnesses are active in the first 3.5 years of the 7-year tribulation because of those things I just read. The activities of these two witnesses are to wreak havoc on anyone who threatens them with harm, to have power over nature, and to give testimony to God. That's why they're called witnesses, right? They're standing in testimony about something, and a lot of people, Christians especially, wonder, why does God, why isn't the church on earth during this time? Why would God leave himself without a representation? And that's not true. We have these two witnesses, especially outside of Jerusalem, and also for the world to see, because all the world's eyes will be on Jerusalem during this time. So they're being equated with all the trees and lampstands, has an echo in Zechariah 4, which we just read, where they refer to the power and spirit of God as executed by Joshua the high priest and Zerubbabel the king. Some of their activities also resemble those of the prophet Elijah, including the 3.5 years of drought and the plagues of Moses. So there's a lot of intertwining going on here. This is how Bible prophecy works. But the thing is that when we know where those prophecies are, we can go and check those contexts and learn more about it, just like we do with Daniel, who gave the 70 weeks prophecy in chapter 9, and that 69 of those weeks had finished when Jesus came, but they rejected him. He was cut off, as Daniel put it, and during this time, the offer had to be delayed. The offer of the kingdom to Israel had to be delayed. God turned to the Gentiles to make Israel jealous. As another talk on the grafting analogy of Romans 11, which I did on Tuesday night. So all this intertwining and patterning and connections, and that's why we have to know the whole Bible and not just parts of it, because everything is, well, I wouldn't say everything, but a lot of things are repeated, or at least come back slightly different way, but they do come back, just like with the abomination of desolation, which is a phrase from Daniel, which Jesus quoted verbatim and named Daniel the prophet when he did it, and saying, when you see that, then other things, have to happen. And what Daniel said was that what Jesus said, in referring to Daniel, people already knew that several hundred years before Christ, Antiochus Epiphanes had fulfilled that prophecy almost completely. And so when Jesus is saying this is going to happen again, we look at what happened before, and so we know there will be an antichrist who will desecrate a temple by also putting an idol in it, and probably also sacrificing an unclean animal on the altar. So we know what happened before, so we know what to look for again, and it's at that time that the two witnesses are killed, which means their ministry started 3.5 years earlier, and so did the temple. So, sorry if you can't post images. YouTube chat won't let you do that. Even if you have a wrench so that you're, able to post links, you can post links, but you can't post pictures. YouTube just won't let you do that. All right, so also the plagues of Moses, some of those, not all, are being repeated by these two witnesses. Okay, good to see you, Divergent Droid. Sorry you can't stay. The biggest question these two raise is why here and now? Why is it that they've been active for 3.5 years and are just now being mentioned? The same thing we could say about the temple. It had to have already been there for 3.5 years, but yet the building of this temple is not mentioned. So why are these two duration-specific events only brought up as part of the sixth trumpet? Again, we don't know if it's really a part of that, if it's between the sixth and the seventh. The wording isn't that clear, but we know at least that the sixth trumpet has done what it had to do before this vision is given. A clue might be that it was only after the fifth trumpet that the abyss was opened. If you go back and look in Revelation, the abyss was open, in the fifth trumpet, and all these creatures come out and they're described and they torment people for 5 months. So immediately after the two witnesses are mentioned, we're told that the beast ascending from the abyss kills them. So what we have here, and try to get some of the timeline, is that for 3.5 years, well, first of all, there was the rapture, and then sometime after that, the 7-year treaty was signed. And then when that's signed, that's when the tribulation actually begins, because it doesn't begin with the rapture. It begins with the signing of that covenant, because that's what Daniel 9 says. It's and why don't we go there? I've already done Zechariah about the olive trees and all that. So let's go up here to Daniel 9. And he tells when he had this visitation from the angel. He had been confessing sins of Israel because he had been reading the prophet Jeremiah to learn about the duration of their exile. And so he prayed to God because that time was up. And that's when we get the prophecy of the 77s. And then it says the angel Gabriel came to him to tell him this. 77 verse 24 are decreed for your people, Israel, your holy city, Jerusalem, to finish transgression, put an end to sin, atone for wickedness, to bring everlasting righteousness, which Jesus did after the 69 weeks, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. So we have the people of Israel, the city of Jerusalem, and the most holy place, which is in the temple in Jerusalem. Very specific, pointed prophecy for Jerusalem, for the temple of Jerusalem and the people of Israel. No one understand this, verse 25, from the time the word goes out to restore and rebuild Jerusalem till the anointed one, the ruler, comes, there will be 7 sevens and 62 sevens. In hindsight, we know by looking at past historical events that these sevens are groups of years. So 7 sevens, so that's 49 years, from a decree to, well, first we have the 77s and 62, but why are they split into 62 and 7? I forget what it is exactly that happened after the 7. I think, if you read Nehemiah, he was a cupbearer to the king, and he was grieved about the broken down state of Jerusalem, and so he was granted permission to go back and rebuild it. And I think it was 7 years it took to get to where they actually had the wall up or something like that. I'm a little fuzzy on that. I should have looked it up before today, but sometimes I need to refresh my memory and I forget to refresh it. So one of the bad things about getting older. But anyway, from the decree to the anointed one is 7 and then 62. So 69 of the 77s. So 77s would be 490 years. All right, but it stopped 7 years short of that. So 483. It says it will be rebuilt with streets and a trench, but in times of trouble. Again, if you read the accounts in the Bible and otherwise, there was a lot of things that had to happen, and there were people opposing and different political things going on to get in the way of rebuilding Jerusalem, especially the wall of Jerusalem. After the 62, so after the 7, after the 62, the anointed one will be put to death and have nothing, which is what happened when Jesus came. Okay? Then the people of the ruler who will come, that is not him. So this is someone else, okay? The anointed one was put to death and have nothing, but the people of the ruler who will come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. Titus, the Roman general, brought his armies there to lay siege to Jerusalem, and it is his people, which you could say Romans. Titus was a Roman. There were Romans in the Roman army, obviously, but there were also other nationalities, but that's really not that important. The important thing is it says the people of the ruler who will come will destroy the city and sanctuary. This happened in 70 AD, 40 years after Jesus died and rose and ascended. So 40 years later is when this was fulfilled. Okay, so already we have a gap of time in this prophecy. People don't like gap theories. I don't like it in Genesis for linguistic and contextual reasons. That's why I don't accept that. But when we look at, and I just want to check something real quick on the live stream. Okay, cool, that's working. And for some reason it only has my icon showing up. I need to make that smaller somehow for next time. I don't know what's going on with that. But anyway, I try different things every week. So, sorry about that little distraction. Anyway, so Roman or Titus and the Roman armies destroyed the sanctuary just as Jesus had predicted that not one stone would be left on top of another. And the reason they did that to the temple is because they had set it on fire and it melted the gold, and the gold ran between the blocks, and so they tore the blocks apart to get the gold. So Jesus predicted this 40 years in advance, and of course this is what's being said here in not about the gold, but about the fact that it would be destroyed. Okay, the city and the sanctuary, Jerusalem and the temple were destroyed. Okay, so 40 years passed between 2 out of 3 things in verse 26. I can't highlight without it covering up the words. But anyway, verse 26 says, after the 62 sevens, which was after the sevens, so after 69 sevens, the anointed one was put to death and have nothing. Then the people of the ruler will destroy the city and sanctuary. So 40 years passed between those two events, just in 2 sentences. Okay? Then the end will come like a flood. War will continue until the end, and desolations have been decreed. This is an unknown period of time, but there's no reason it can't be 2,000 years, or almost, because we already have a 40-year gap without any indication in the text that this would happen, and yet in hindsight, we know it did. He will confirm that verse 27, so all that important stuff happened in 26. 25 identified the amount of time and to whom this prophecy was about, for whom. 26 is more timing things about the destruction, about the death of the anointed one, the destruction of the temple 40 years later, and then another time that we don't know, war continuing until the end. So we have this gap of time is right here, very obvious in the text. Verse 27, he who's the last he in the passage? That's what we mean by the nearest antecedent linguistically. Who is he? Not the anointed one. We've got the people of the ruler who will come. So we have a ruler who destroys the city and sanctuary. That's the nearest antecedent for he. That he will confirm a covenant with many for 1 7, the final one, the 70th. In the middle of that 7, 3.5 years, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering, and at the temple he will set up an abomination that causes desolation. That is to say, he'll do what Antiochus Epiphanes did several hundred years before Christ, put up an idol. It talks about the idol in Revelation being given a mouth to speak, and that people would have to worship the idol, and that's when the mark of the beast is given also. At the temple he'll set up an abomination that causes desolation until the end that is decreed is poured out on him. So the actual reign of the Antichrist is only the second half of 3.5 years. He rises, from the abyss at the midpoint, at the 7th trumpet, or the 5th trumpet, it's opened, and the creatures come out, and the leader is Abaddon or Apollyon, which means destroyer. So this one is the person who is inhabited by that entity, right? So this is Satan we're talking about at the midpoint. What happens before that? A treaty is signed. It doesn't mean he's ruling as king, but there's an awful lot that has to happen. I think this is where the kingdom is consolidated and solidified, because there's other prophecies about 10 kings who have power for a short time, and this ruler uproots 3 of them, and they give their power to him, and so there's a lot going on. But this is just more of the context of what we're talking about in Revelation and Zechariah. So I'm going to get rid of that other tabs. I don't have too many tabs open. So, since the beast is presumed by many to be the now Satan-possessed world leader who signed the treaty 3.5 years before, just maybe not inhabited by Satan at the first, then the midpoint of the 70th week, when the beast declares himself God, is shortly after the 2 witnesses are killed. Yet another support for their ministry having begun at the start of that week of years. So if you really think about this stuff, which is what you do when you're doing Bible study and not just Bible reading and going, I don't know what this means, I'm just going to forget about it, you're given all sorts of clues. All right. And if you look in the Old Testament for prophecies and you look in the New Testament and see very similar things, then there's a reason for that. And it's to help us understand, because there are many fulfillments. I've used the illustration of a coiled spring before. If you take, looking down a spring, I'm going to make sure I'm pointing at my camera here. If you hold a spring up like this and you look, it's coming toward you wherever my camera is. If you were to draw I have a picture of this somewhere, a dot on each, of one line. If you put a ruler on the coils of the spring and put a dot where the ruler touched each one of those coils, that's kind of how prophecy is. It'll keep coming around and coming around. We don't know how many times for each given prophecy but we know, at least when these that we're talking about, the 4 horses and the 2 witnesses, that we've seen this before in Zechariah chapters 1 and 4 and in Daniel 9. Okay, just to make that point. I've also used the illustration of a lock with tumblers. If you put a key in a lock, there's a bunch of little piston things or levers, or however you want to think of it, or depending on the type of lock, that have to be put a certain distance away. That's why the key has a funny shape, right? But you don't know how, if you've got the key all the way in, for any given prophecy, is this the last time? Is this the last tumbler? Is this the last coil of the spring? We just don't know. Or like a combination lock, how many times are you going to turn this thing? It depends. And we don't know how many turns there are, but we can look at all this stuff in hindsight and go, we know we've come quite a distance. And if you look at what's going on in the world right now, it can't be very much farther. For one thing, there are actually 2 things that put an air of finality on things going on now, because people always say, and it's true, that there have been other significant year numbers or events, such as world wars or the year 1000, the year 2000, the year 2012. People get all excited and come up with all sorts of prophetic nonsense because they're not paying attention about all these phases. But the 2 things are, first of all, Israel and its land. They were thrown out of their land in 70 AD, and for the longest time, students of Bible prophecy thought they would never be back. Right? Not literally, not physically in the land, any literal people of Israel. And that's where all those other theories about how to interpret prophecy came from that time, because they said, Israel's obviously never coming back. We have to take these as allegories or symbolic of some struggle of good and evil. That's where all those things came from. I don't care if Jesuits were involved or not. The point is, because you can find a Jesuit under any rock on any side of any controversy, right? So smearing people with Jesuits doesn't help anybody and doesn't bolster anybody's argument. But the thing is that when Israel was reestablished, I don't care why, the fact is that God predicted it. There is a final gathering there will be, but God knows the end from the beginning, as it says in the Old Testament, I am God and there is no other, I am God and there is none like me, declaring the end from the beginning, from ancient times, what is still to come, saying, I will do all my purpose, all that, I've got that misworded on that part, I will do all that I please, and my purpose will stand. So, we know that it is no accident that Israel's recreated. Yes, the Rothschilds were involved, the Balfour Declaration, worldly things, right? But do you think that was an accident? Do you think God didn't know that was coming? The fact is, even in all those years before 1948, there were a few who were ridiculed for saying, no, Israel will be back. It must come back to fulfill the prophecies. So they did in 1948. For whatever reasons, it doesn't matter, there they are. And in 1967, they took Jerusalem. Nobody's sure which of those dates is which of those 2 dates is more significant prophetically. But the point is that they had Jerusalem by 67. And there they are in their land speaking Hebrew in very minimal borders, because the Balfour Declaration gave them a lot more land than that, right? More like what was originally promised to Abraham. So they have like half of it now. They reneged on them. They bait and switched them and changed the declaration before they actually got there. And of course they were attacked immediately. But the point is that God knew this was going to happen, and so he made these prophecies saying there's going to be an Israel, and there's going to be a treaty, and there's going to be a temple. And I'm going to send 2 witnesses, because it's all about Jerusalem then, which means it's all about Jerusalem and not the church at the very beginning of that 70th week. So we can't be here. There's a gazillion other reasons, but we can't be there because if you look at the grand scheme of prophecy, that's how this works. God is all about Jerusalem and Israel. All throughout Bible prophecy, there's a little bit in the new about us, but the vast majority, even in Revelation, after chapter 3, the church is not mentioned, I don't think, until the very end, after the millennium. So, a gazillion reasons, like I said, and I've gone over those things before, maybe I'll do again someday, but the point is that we know that this hasn't started yet because we're still here, okay? There are things in place now that are very much telling us where we are in history because we're seeing we have reminds me of the second point. The first point was Israel, especially Jerusalem, and their desire to build a temple. They have everything ready to go. The second thing is that they have been destroying the earth to the point where life cannot endure much longer because they have poisoned the sky, they've poisoned the water, they've poisoned the food, they've poisoned the people. They're trying to genetically alter us. The most current injection scheme contains mRNA or something like that. It is gene therapy, unwitting to people who don't ask. So far, mostly voluntary, but they're tightening the screws every day. Companies are saying, no, you got to have this thing or you can't come back to work. And so this is a precursor or conditioning for, along with a lot of other things, is conditioning for the kingdom of the beast and taking the mark. In my opinion, speculation, the mark will be a DNA quote-unquote upgrade. Because later on, the people who take that mark will break out in terrible malignant sores, which in my opinion is the body rejecting that DNA upgrade. Well, how is it being administered? Not by an injection. It's being administered by a tattoo. Because the Greek word is etching. This mark, I think is kerygma or something like that, if I remember right. It's scratching into something. So that's what a tattoo basically is. And yes, they can put electronic tattoos on you and make your phone part of you or whatever, and they can certainly give you the mark of the beast that way, and it will be visible on the forehead or the right hand. And these, in my opinion, are also not personal IDs. There's the mark of the beast, not of us, not the mark of any humans. And its purpose will be to, they call it transhumanism, where they want you to be the next step of evolution, which is a lie by itself. There is no evolution, but they want to change you into something non-human. So that, and why do you think we have stories about X-Men and mutants and things like that, people with superpowers? Because they're going to say, because they've got you all conditioned culturally, that this is going to be awesome, that you will have superpowers. Oh, and by the way, you can't buy or sell unless you've been upgraded. The world is already conditioned for that. And if you'll notice about the things that have happened in the past year, that it all happened around the world at the same time, and everybody down to the local level officials was on board. You never saw people all march lockstep like that in every level of government all around the world in any memory that any of us have. I mean, maybe something like this was going on in the pre-flood world, but none of us have ever seen anything like this. And when Jesus talked about the end times, he said, especially about this last 3.5 years of the 7 years, will be a time like no other, like has never been before and will never be again. So we're seeing unprecedented things in a poisoned world that will only be livable by people who have this DNA change. I really hate to call it an upgrade. But this is the one of the, the second of the two things I'm saying are different about this time in history. So there's reasons why I believe we're on the cusp of the tribulation, that isn't just it's a certain year, because there's nothing significant about this number, and it isn't even established that modern Western year numbers have anything to do with Bible prophecy or any significance at all. So we got to remember this isn't about us, okay? This is about Israel and the whole Bible and the way the Bible uses terms. And so when we see all these things happening, we're supposed to be paying attention. Jesus rebuked people of his day for not knowing the time of their visitation, right? So they're supposed to know that this is, we're supposed to have known the first time that to expect him, and there were a few expecting him. So, because there are some critics who say, well, nobody was expecting a Messiah figure or anything like that. Yes, they were. Not only was there two at the temple when Jesus was brought in for dedication, what was the first guy's name? Ananias, maybe? And the woman's name was Anna, and they both, said things about Jesus when he was brought in. And one of them said he was told, the guy was told he wouldn't die until he had seen this Messiah, right? So he was expecting the Messiah. And a lot of people, you can hear the comments when you're reading the Gospels about, is this the coming one? Is this the one, is this the Messiah? So why would they say that if they weren't expecting one? Okay, and yes, the Jews still are. They're still waiting. He came before they rejected him, so the offer was withdrawn temporarily. They will eventually have it, and that's the reason for that 70th week, is to purify Israel so that he can come back. It's not as the dominionists or kingdom now Christians say, that we have to clean up the world so Jesus can come. That's not how this works. They know nothing of the Bible when they say that. This is about cleaning up Israel. The rest of the world will be judged as well. But also, as we read, if you remember in Zechariah, was in the context of having to pay back the other nations for the judgment they meted out to Israel. And that's exactly what God's going to do again in the tribulation. So there's a lot of things going on, but Revelation ties up all of those prophecies. And so we can add the fact of the timing at the midpoint rather than the end of the tribulation for these two witnesses. The fact that the world is still functioning enough so people can celebrate the death of the two witnesses by exchanging gifts for 3.5 days. Okay, so where we are in the 7 years, we got to think about things like that. The people have not starved or been devastated enough to the point where they can't even give gifts anymore. It's pretty hard to do when you read about the bold or vile judgments of the second half. How anything normal can happen during that time, once those judgments starts. But the thing is that, those judgments come out in 3 groups of 7 and then they increase in severity because God is showing mercy at every single step and saying, okay, this thing happened. Have I got your attention yet? And then this thing, and this thing, and this thing. And it keeps going on and getting worse. But at the midpoint of the 7 years, these witnesses have been witnessing, obviously, but the world hated them and they send each other gifts. So they still have the ability to send each other's gifts around the world by the time they're killed. That's why, another reason that they have been active in the first half of the tribulation, they're killed at the midpoint. Okay? But even when the people gloat over their death, it's short-lived because they rise and are taken up to heaven while their enemies watch. And lest the beast try to spin all this into being Christ, who sends the two, he might say, are the beast and the false prophet in the lake of fire, which would be a great deception. There was a guy named Bill Koenig? No. There's 2 Bills in prophecy. I can't remember which Bill it is. Anyway, one of those Bill guys who has a prophecy site, the Prophetic Years. He's moved his site since then, but anyway, I don't think it's Bill Koenig. I think somebody else. Anyway, the Prophetic Years site, he had this theory that there would be 3.5 years between the rapture and the beginning of that treaty, the beginning of the tribulation. Because, think about it, suppose that there's a rapture in 3.5 years and the world is dealing with that. And then 3.5 years later, I'm drawing these diagrams on my desk where you can't see me. 3.5 years, rapture, start of the treaty, and then another 3.5 years. Oh, and look, this is actually the midpoint of the tribulation, but it's been 7 years, and people will think this Antichrist has just sent away the beast and the false prophet to the lake of fire. It possible. It's intriguing. No, not Bill, not the gates of hell, who are having marital difficulties. I understand. So we're led to believe. Who knows what's true? You never know with people like that. Anyway, the point is, I can just look up a site called The Prophetic Years and Bible Prophecy, and you'll find the guy. I know there's a Bill Koenig, but there's a Bill somebody else, and I can't remember which one that guy is. Anyway, I think it's an intriguing theory. Now, some people say there's only a few months at most between the rapture and the beginning of the tribulation. I don't know or care, because I won't be here. But I'm just saying, it's a time of deception. We all know that for sure, because Jesus said the first thing when his disciples asked him about the end times, the first thing he said is, don't be deceived. So there's going to be a lot of mind-bending going on. But anyway, God will destroy 1/10 of Jerusalem and 7,000 people with a severe earthquake when he takes the two up into heaven. So at that point, I don't think the spin will be very possible anymore, although there are people, no, not Bill Salus. He's another prophecy teacher. There's like a bunch of Bill guys doing prophecy, but not Bill Salus. Okay, now I'm going to have to look it up, because it's my fault I couldn't remember the prophetic years. Let me see. No, I'll have to have the name Bill with it, because I can't, if it's not telling me other things. Oh, there we go. There's this website. That's the old one. Let me get you that link. So, but what if I'm still here? Oh, well. I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. But anyway. Okay. So I had the last name right, not the first name. Don Koenig. There is a Bill Koenig, who is also a prophecy teacher. This guy is Don Koenig. I don't know if he's still with us or not, but yeah, post no bills. Now you tell me. Anyway, so, all right, I had to get that little thing out of my head. But anyway, the message is clearly perceived about the earthquake and the number of people killed, causes the survivors to finally give honor to the God of heaven. There's also an obvious parallel with the cloud in which the two are taken up and the one which Jesus was taken up at an ascension. And no, he did not return in the clouds yet for the rapture, and they think, well, that can't happen twice. Well, there's a rapture and there's a second coming. We've been over that before. But the thing is that he will, when he comes back again, to the earth, he will come in the clouds. When we're taken up, we meet him in the air. And then, this is the same thing that happened to these two witnesses, where they're, and I'm looking over this way because that's where the chat is. Camera's over here. Some way I'll keep all that straight. But the thing is that these people, these two witnesses, are mortals who worked for 3.5 years. They were put to death by the Antichrist, the beast. Then they're raised after 3.5 days and taken up to heaven in a kind of a rapture. Some people say there's more than one rapture. I think that muddies the waters, because the rapture is one particular event. And being taken up to heaven, we should probably just use that term instead, just to avoid confusion. So, just going to finish up this little paragraph here. Yet even then, the most severe judgments are about to begin, and if this marks the second half of the 70th week from Daniel 9:27, we can refer to it as the time of Jacob's trouble from Jeremiah 30:4-7, Daniel 12:1, Matthew 24:15-22, or traditionally the Great Tribulation. And as we see in Revelation 13:5, if you read there, the duration of this time is 42 months or 3.5 years or 1,260 days. So, that's what's going on with the two witnesses and the four horses. And I have a little bit on Zechariah here in my book study, so let me give you that link. And thank you also. I see nice comments in the chat every now and then. Sorry I can't pay more attention because I'm having a tough enough time keeping my topic together here as it is. So Zechariah, just a little more about him, was a prophet and priest born in Babylonian captivity just before the return. So his message was for the remnant, starting over in Israel, to motivate them to finish the job of rebuilding as a faithful nation. And Zechariah begins with the backdrop of the prophetic messages, which is the history of Israel's unfaithfulness to God, which is why they have some more judgment coming. They're still unfaithful. They must repent before God can bless them, which we know he longs to do. So, the first vision was of the 4 horses, which matches Revelation 6, 1 through 8, but they're not the same colors. Revelation has white, red, black, and green, and these are 2 reds, 1 mixed, and 1 white. And there was also a brown horse. The difference, because there's several different passages of horses in Zechariah. The difference is due to their purpose here, which is stated in verse 10, to patrol the earth and report back to God. We can speculate about the colors, but red typically represents war, white is peace, and the mixture probably is a transition. I don't know. Anyway, God doesn't need patrols. He just does that. The angels have tasks as well, and we will judge angels, it says in 1 Corinthians. So anyway, then the other vision in chapter 4 is of basically a menorah, flanked on either side by olive trees. So it's a light that's continually energized, as I mentioned before, since the oil grows right beside it. Zerubbabel was in the line of David, was a leader of the first group to return from exile. The mountain was the task of rebuilding. The small beginning was not taken lightly because God was watching over it. So Zechariah asked again about the 2, and that's where it says they are the anointed ones who stand before the Lord of the whole earth. Are they the 2 witnesses? Like I said, I think they are. There's a commentary I've been referring to in this that I think was Constable's notes, argues for them representing the high priest and governor at that time, which is a more immediate context, but they certainly also have fulfillment in the future, because there will be a temple and the 2 witnesses will be in Jerusalem. So if we look back, like I said about Antiochus Epiphanes, then we know what to look for in the future. And since at the time of this prophecy, the trees represented priest and governor, we should expect the future 2 witnesses to do the same. Just saying. Notice that both here and in Revelation, the grammar indicates a continuing state. That is, these 2 stand, not have stood or will stand, beside the Lord. Like this is a continual thing that they do. But we don't know if they've always stood there before the world was made. We don't know. So we can't rule out anybody else such as Enoch, Elijah, or Moses. Okay? Just to make those points. Now, there's one more article, and before I get started in that, I want to post it. Try to remember to keep doing that. And this one is Revelation Made Clear. I don't know much more about it. I just grabbed this article, so I might look at the rest of it later. It has some audio. Says the Lamb worthy opened the scroll. The 7 seals are opening a scroll, which a lot of commentators believe is basically the title deed to the earth that the Lamb bought back and is finally opening and coming back to take possession. So they say on the first seal, the Lamb opens it. When the seal's open, one of the 4 living creatures says, "Come," reveals the white horse, a bow and a crown. And this is a victor's crown, not the diadem of royalty. And the rider holds a bow but no arrows. And some people try to say he's just wearing a sash. I've been over that before. It's ridiculous to think the word toxon there means anything like a fabric, even though Strong's Exhaustive Concordance says apparently the simplest fabric. I don't know where they got that. It has nothing to do with the fabric. It has anything to do with anything bent in the shape of an arc, like a bow for shooting. The context tells you what kind of bow. And here, this is a rider with a bow and a victor's crown, so it's a weapon. But he has no arrows. But I'm not going to get into what that could possibly mean, because it's all speculation anyway, and I've done it before. The first 4 seals reveal what has been commonly called the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. We read about them in Zechariah 1, 7-11, 6, 1-8. In chapter 1, the horses and riders are sent by the Lord to patrol the earth. In chapter 6, The horses and riders are commanded to patrol. The key to understand this image is found in Zechariah 6:5. The 4 horses and riders are going out to the 4 winds of heaven, which is another piece of the puzzle here. 4 winds of heaven. What does that mean? So we've got it here in Zechariah 6:5, the 4 winds of heaven, because that phrase is in Revelation, okay? I think at least twice. Scripture uses 4 winds to refer to a sweeping judgment. Okay? So 4 corners of the earth having the winds held back, gathering his people from one end of the heavens to the other, related to stuff. Okay? Notice these passages where 4 winds are used. And I will bring upon Elam the 4 winds from the 4 quarters of heaven. And I will scatter them to all those winds. And keep in mind, heaven and sky are the same word. I think also in Hebrew, but I'd have to look. But it is in Greek, and there's Greek Old Testament. So I will scatter them to all those winds. And there will be no nation to which those driven out of Elam shall not come. And the kingdom will be broken and divided toward the 4 winds of heaven, but not to his posterity. This is a prophecy in Daniel about what turns out to be about Alexander the Great, whose untimely early death meant that his kingdom was handed to his 4 top generals, the Ptolemies, Seleucid, a couple of the other, I can't remember the other 2 names right now. Nor according to the authority by which he ruled for his kingdom shall be plucked up and go to others besides these. So flee from the land of the north, declares the Lord, for I have spread you abroad as the 4 winds of the heavens. He will send out his angels. This is Matthew 24:31. He will send out his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the 4 winds. So there we have it used 2 together, 4 winds from one end of the heaven to the other. So maybe from all over heaven, maybe from all over the sky. Just saying the possibilities. Revelation 7:1, after this I saw 4 angels standing on the 4 corners of the earth holding back the 4 winds of heaven. In Zechariah, the 4 horsemen are going to the 4 winds of heaven to unleash the sweeping judgment. In Revelation, they're doing the same thing. The image of the 4 horsemen is repeated to call the reader's mind that this is an image of the coming of sweeping judgment. We need this knowledge so we can make the proper interpretation in this chapter. When they learn the role of the 4 horsemen in the Old Testament, we see that they're not compelled to make each individual rider have a particular meeting. More like their meeting comes from the fact that there's 4 of them and there's horses. For example, many see the first rider on white referring to the Christ, which I don't, obviously. Many see the rider as Antichrist. However, this is not the intention of Revelation. This is the opinion of this article. In Zechariah, there's also a white horse with a rider, but it's not referring to Christ. It's just one of the 4 horses that are together are unleashing sweeping judgment. So just another possibility that it doesn't have to be the Antichrist in the first rider. Because when you think about it, it's also possible that the first seal is opened when the treaty is signed. We don't know. And if so, it wouldn't, it may be the white horse if the treaty isn't signed until, if, as I think is possible, the seals are between the revelation and the beginning of the actual tribulation, which would be first half trumpets, second half bowls, that the seals would be the beginning of sorrows or the birth pangs. Maybe. There's all sorts of different scenarios that work, and so we can't say for sure. But, and I have a chart somewhere I've shown before, but anyway, this opinion of this article is that the 4 horses are just saying sweeping worldwide judgment. Okay? The rider of the horse is given a crown, given authorities. Again, it's a victor's crown. What does the rider with authority do? Is it authority to conquer and continue conquering? Christ has unleashed power to conquer. I don't agree with them there on that. Okay? I think the rest of the seals are pretty explanatory. But let me see if I think they have the 2 witnesses. No, maybe they don't have the witnesses in this article. I was hoping they did. Like I said, I haven't looked around this site. Well, let me just go there real quick. I figured they might have some links where it says, this. I gave you my opinions on the horses and the 2 witnesses, so now I'm giving you their opinion. Where it says, God grants authority to his 2 witnesses to prophesy for 1,260 days. The same 42 months, time times and half a time. We agree on that. That it would go on, it would going. Okay. Anyway, typo. A limited time of tribulation, distress, and persecution. So, 2 witnesses are clothed in sackcloth, times of mourning and distress. Mourning over the judgment message they are preaching. So, they're a warning message. Okay? And so, another reason that's the first half of the tribulation. We want to know who the 2 witnesses are. The next verses describe who are the 2 witnesses. They are the 2 olive trees and the 2 lampstands that stood before the Lord of all the earth. Reference to Zechariah 4:2-14 that we already read. Unfortunately, Zechariah 4 is a little difficult text to understand, which does not help us much in understanding who they are in Revelation 11. However, the force of the teaching is that the Spirit of God was going to accomplish His word. The obstacles would be removed and the temple would be rebuilt by the power of God, accomplishing the prophecy of God. It is likely that the 2 anointed ones is referring to the Joshua and Zerubbabel, that is to say the king, the governor and the king, who would be the tools God would use to rebuild the temple. This has also, like we said, has to do with the temple. All right? So this is an intriguing theory. This is a message in Revelation 11:4. The word of God is going to be accomplished through the power of the Holy Spirit, represented by the 2 witnesses. Verses 5 and 6 will give us more clarity. So they're in Jerusalem, a king and a governor, if that's who these are, whoever is king and governor at this time when the tribulation starts. And people can turn to God after the rapture. So let's see what else I have to say here. Verse 5 says that recompense will fall on those who harm the 2 witnesses. The language reminiscent of the divine protection God offered to the 2 prophets, in 2 Kings 1:10, Jeremiah 5:14. Let's see, it says, Ahaziah sent his army to take Elijah back to him. Elijah called for fire to come down from heaven and consume the army. The fire pictures judgment against those who resist the 2 witnesses. Verse 6 reveals that who these 2 witnesses are. The witnesses have power to shut the sky so that no rain falls. While they prophesy, they have the power to turn the waters to blood and strike the earth with plague. The one who was able to shut up the sky was Elijah, 1 Kings 17:1. And the one who brought the plagues was Moses, Exodus 7:17-21. To match what we were told in verses 4 and 5, we must see Elijah and Moses representing the law and the prophets. Remember that we saw the 2 olive trees and 2 lampstands represent the word of the Lord being accomplished through the power of the Spirit of God. The law and the prophets foretold these events concerning the destruction of the Jewish nation. Moses prophesied these events would happen in Deuteronomy 28:15-68. Okay? So they're drawing their analogies from the Old Testament, all right? Anyway, you can read through this whole thing, like I said, Deuteronomy 28:52-57. Description details exactly what happened during the Jerusalem siege by the Romans from 66 to 70 AD. 70 was when it was completed, okay? It began in 66 AD. Okay? Daniel prophesied the destruction of the Jewish nation in the vision of 70 weeks. Prophecy concerns the Jews in Jerusalem according to Daniel 9:24. 70 weeks are decreed about your people, your holy city. And the people of the prince who is to come, as we read before, shall destroy the city and sanctuary. Its end will come with a flood, and to the end there shall be war. Desolations are decreed. So therefore, the 2 witnesses represent all of God's servants who are proclaiming the word from the Lord. So, but there's, of course, been many more than 2 in all these ensuing years. Notably, the witnesses would include the prophets and apostles. So they're saying that it isn't 2 individuals. And I hope they walk that back pretty soon, because I can't agree with them there, because these 2 things are not going to die and people gloat over their bodies. They're not representations. They're actual humans. Okay? Anyway, prophesying, preaching the holy city would be trampled. The word of the Lord would be accomplished. And the servants of God, the 2 witnesses, because they can't be the king and the governor if they're also apostles and prophets in the church. Okay, these 2 things can't both be true. So like I said, I hope they walk this back, but I'm not getting my hopes up just yet. The descriptions about the 2 witnesses, we're talking about a larger body of God's servants, not just 2 people. See, I got to disagree with them there. Because the 2 witnesses are killed and left in the streets of Jerusalem and people gloat over them. And it says two, two, two the whole time. It doesn't say that they represent anybody in Revelation. Okay? So, yes, these entities were used in general, but even in this analogy in the Old Testament where it says the king and the governor, those were two individual people. Two individuals, two humans, right? So it doesn't always mean a group of representative people. This is where I think they're making a mistake here. And it does make sense if they're two individuals, because he just, in this article, they just named two individuals, the king and the prophet. So I don't agree with them there. I'm sorry that they went there, so can't really recommend that site too much. But anyway, you get the idea that, and like I said, I think I've given you the link to that because I have it highlighted. So you get the idea that the two witnesses certainly are tied directly back to Zechariah, the book of Zechariah in the Old Testament. But the thing is, I'm convinced still that they are two individual people, because not only do we have that precedent in the Old Testament of the king and the governor, we also have other people who haven't died, like Enoch and Elijah, never died physically. Or it could be Moses and Elijah, who are the two who appeared with Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration before his crucifixion, right? Moses and Elijah were there, talking about what was about to happen to Jesus. So, it's complicated. But again, if you take all the details and go, yes, we have some application here, but we have a difference over here. We have to consider the immediate context in Revelation as well, because like I said, sometimes the prophecy that comes back around has a little bit different to it, And we saw that about the Antichrist compared to Antiochus Epiphanes. Interesting names connection there too. But we're also seeing that in the two witnesses, in my opinion, because again, yeah, if one assumes that the church is in the tribulation, first of all, is a giant leap. And second of all, that these prophets and apostles would only be represented when they're destroyed by the Antichrist, because Jesus said, I will build my church and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. In here, in Revelation, the gates of hell are prevailing against the people of God. It pretty much says that. So that's why they can't be us. So there's a lot of reasons why the church isn't here for even the first seal. And there's a lot of reasons why the two witnesses are two individual mortals. And there's a lot of reasons why the four horses are bringing judgments around the whole world and not just to Jerusalem. So, and yeah, I don't think I have anything else to add on that. It just was mainly to answer the question last week about the two witnesses. So as you can see, this is like, just examining one part of a very complex biological specimen and going, I still don't, there's still very complicated things going on here. I know a few things, but I don't know the whole picture. So we have to have grace on the differences and disagreements. Even as for the timing of the rapture, I'm absolutely convinced it's pre-trib for many reasons. And I don't just make up reasons. I read the whole Bible. I do what I did today. So I just hope that people have the grace to recognize that other people study too, and that we shouldn't be bashing each other over these kind of differences. What we should be doing is uniting around the gospel, and also not doing like I started out my little live stream today, talking about the aggravation of every Mother's Day hearing a sermon about obedient wives instead of about mothers. Mothers were kind of like maybe a fourth to a third of the message, and it was all about, we got to have the women submitting to the men, even though they also read the part in Ephesians 5 where it says submit to each other. How can it be one-way submission when it's two-way? And then a sermon about how people need to study a Bible, but it was directed only at the men. Makes my blood boil, but that's why I didn't want to talk about it today, because today I already had this prepared and it was an earlier question. So maybe next week we'll do the women thing again and do an actual maybe talk more about actual biblical mothers instead of how wives and husbands are supposed to do things, and I don't know why that has to happen every single year. Doesn't matter who's speaking. So we had guest speakers today. It's like, why is every Mother's Day sermon about wives and husbands? It's supposed to be about mothers. Because I'm pretty sure on Father's Day, we're going to hear some more about wives and husbands. Maybe I won't show up. Because, again, it's hard not to walk out when that happens. But, yes, privileges and entitlements and people knowing their places. This is what we're all about. No, we're not only supposed to not bash each other over prophecy, we're also not supposed to be going, oh, you're an enemy because you're teaching that we're all equal. No, Satan is the enemy. We need to remember who the enemy is, as it says, as it's in the phrase in Hunger Games. Remember who the real enemy is. Christians need to do that. We're not the enemy. Yes, they will say things about false teachers, and they'll say anybody who disagrees with me is false, ergo a false teacher, therefore I can treat them like crap. So that's not how this works, though. And especially on hot button items like relationships, we need to remember who the enemy is. The enemy is Satan. The enemy is deception. And we need to gracefully let people do what the Holy Spirit is leading them to do, and only disfellowship if they're teaching what you can point to the Bible and say is falsehood. Yet they think they can point to it on prophecy or Bible versions or women in ministry or any of those things. They think they can point to. What are you going to do? But all you can do is break fellowship when that sort of thing happens. When, there is no, people are convinced that what you're teaching is false, then you got to part ways. But we each have our convictions, but hopefully I would like more Christians to remember it's the reason we're here is to spread the gospel, which the core of it is salvation by grace through faith, not of works, so that nobody can boast. It's that Jesus rose from the dead, and by trusting him, we can be adopted as children of God, and we're given the deposit of the Holy Spirit as a down payment guaranteeing our inheritance. So, having accepted adoption, our job is to encourage more orphans to accept the adoption. And instead of that, we get tied up in all these other things. So, these other things are important, but we shouldn't be bashing each other over them. So, that's all I have for today. Like I said, I will probably do the women topic again next week. Probably better not to have thrown that together at the last minute when I'm in a bad mood about it. Anyway, so, I already have done that before, but it seems to be in need of revisiting. But thanks for that link, Chow. Going there was a very long thing, but it was necessary. And it started out, if I recall, on that one with how society in general has treated women. And, they tried today to do what I call soft patriarchy, which is trying very much to make sure that women aren't abused over this teaching. But the problem is the teaching, and that it isn't biblical. And that's why I wrote a book. But anyway, we'll probably talk about that next week. And are there any questions or comments in the chat before we shut down for today? Yeah, I had people on panel then. That's why it was 3.5 hours. There's no way I could talk that long. But it was very nice. So, what maybe would be a good idea if you could watch at least part of it before next week, then you'll have some backdrop before we get into that. So, thank you everyone in chat. And remember that I also live stream on Tuesday nights from a different Discord channel. And we have a different series of topics that we're going. Question about Jesus and Jesus was born as a biological male, so that's why he has gender. But nobody has gender in heaven. It's already said. Jesus himself said that there's no marrying in heaven. So anyway, yep. Everybody have a happy Mother's Day. Don't listen to anybody tell you need to get in your place if you're going to be a good mother. And The Bible tells us how to be good Christians, which automatically would make a mother a good mother if she, it also, if you're got the rest of your life together, you'll have your best shot at being a good mother. But of course, if you know you need help, then get help. There's really good books on, like, when you're first becoming a mother, what to expect when you're expecting, what you expect the first year. That's probably outdated by now. I don't know, but there's all sorts of help to get. So, and that's, just to add that the sermon wasn't based on Proverbs 31 today at all. It was based in Titus, about dealing with people in Crete, and the problem the women there were were abandoning their homes, and they had to be told, no, you can't just do that. You have to be good model citizens, even if society has some silly rules. That's what you have to do. And but anyway, the thing is that that's not the place you go for a Mother's Day, because it isn't even about elderly women teaching young women. It's about elders who were appointed in the first chapter. But like I said, I don't want to get ahead of myself. But anyway, just remember that one of the reasons I brought that up just now again is that the women needed guidance. They needed to know how to manage their lives. They didn't know that. And everybody needs to know how to manage their life. So there's talking about what the women there needed, what the men there needed, like Paul does in 1 Corinthians, where he says, I want the men to pray without, with clean hands. It doesn't mean that women can pray with unclean hands. And just that women needed to know certain things about not having, worrying more about their appearance than their spirit. It doesn't mean that all women are like that and all women need the same message forever. So anyway, hopefully I'll remember half that next week. But anyway, thanks for coming. And we will hopefully see you Tuesday night, 8 p.m. Eastern. And otherwise, we'll see you next week here at 2 p.m. Eastern. And everybody take care until then. So let me get these ready to go for outro. Thanks for coming.